Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran and we finally have it. We have the date when 9.05 will be releasing, which actually will be the next reset. So this next Tuesday, Wednesday of the next week, depending if you are in A or EU region, 9.05 will finally be here. And Blizzard put up a pretty comprehensive blue post on everything that's going to be available with this new patch. Now on this channel, we try to cover everything and anything that's updated on the PTR and try to show you guys off some of the class changes, new abilities, changes to the covenants, and I feel like we've been pretty extensive. But Blizzard did add a couple new things to the 9.05 blue post, some of the things that weren't presently available on this list, and there's probably going to be a couple new things Tuesday, Wednesday for us to find out when the patch is released. So let's take a look at everything that's notable on the blue post. We'll skim over the stuff that we talked on the channel, but we'll address some of the new things that weren't there before. Now, at the very beginning of this 9.05 blue post, Blizzard does begin with adventures, and we're going to skip those because it's basically mission table stuff. We're not really a channel, it's all about mission table. Characters that are undead will now actually have their cloaks tattered if you use the full bony skin, but if you use the non-bony skin, you'll actually have a cloak that doesn't have a bone kind of poking through you. So that's going to be a nice visual change if you are an undead player that uses cloaks. Blizzard is fixing some of the visual stuff for abilities like Ashen Hollow, Abomination Limb, Swarm and Mist, Death's Due, Wild Spirits, Resonant Arrow, Ancient Aftershock, in terms of being too cluttered. Like, players will be able to see where you're planning and using those abilities, but they won't completely take up your screen inside of a massive raid. We got some different updates for the Death Knights. Most of the stuff there isn't new, but IA, for example, will not remove spell reflection from the warrior. Unholy Pact talent will actually hit large bosses. Abilities like Shackle and Worthy is buffed as before. It is going to have a bigger debuff to it. Abomination Limb got changed a little. It will no longer take stealthies out of stealth, but even if the Death Knight is crowd controlled, the Abomination Limb will continue doing damage and gripping enemies, so it's going to be pretty annoying in PvP. Death's Due is the same as we covered before. This ability isn't too different, but basically you'll be able to stack up the strength buff and the debuff quicker. For Demon Hunters, the talent of Unbound Chaos has been beefed quite a bit. For Covenant abilities, mostly for Vengeance Demon Hunter, Elysian Decree, The Hunt, and Sinful Brand have been reduced by about 10%, while Fodder of the Flame got a pretty big rework. We'll see how big Fodder of the Flame is going to be for Demon Hunters, and if anybody's even going to give this ability a try, but I feel like the rework ability looks far better than the current version that we have in 9.02. For Conduits, you have Repeat Decree, damage has been slightly reduced. The Fell Defender Conduit for Vengeance Demon Hunters has gotten changed. I guess it's a nerf if you were looking for it to work with Fiery Brand, but now Fell Defender will now work with Fell Devastation instead. So more damage, but less defensive value. Demonic Parole also shouldn't make enemies aggro to you after Imprison expires and they're slowed. So let's say you want to bypass some mobs instead of a dungeon, you can hit them with Imprison and the slow won't aggro to you. For Druids, Rejuve and Wild Growth have their healing increased slightly. For Covenant abilities, Adaptive Swarm will now be a little bit more effective, increasing the amount of damage and healing by 25, and the effectiveness of periodic effects also to 25, which is a 5% buff. This buff is changed to 35 for Balanced Druids, so potentially dot-based builds maybe for Boomkins in the future. And Convoke the Spirits saw a bit of a nerf for Resto and Guardian, as you can no longer get Full Moon or Feral Frenzy when using Convoke the Spirits. I think you will still do a lot of damage with Guardian and Resto. If let's say you're in Boomy form with Heart of the Wild, you'll still get a bunch of Star Surges, but you will no longer get a massive Full Moon to just kind of spike your numbers. Finally, as a Venthyr Druid, and I don't think there's a lot of you there, but you'll be happy to know that Endless Thirst Conduit got buffed, so it increases your crit chance by 0.8% instead of 0.5 per application of the stack of the ability. For Hunters, they got some bug fixes, especially with Hunters Sated debuff when using Primal Rage, and Feign Death being cancelled when you open your map or use emotes. For Beastmaster Hunter, Spitting Cobra has gotten buffed, but last time I tested on PTR, it didn't seem nearly that big, so that 260% might be a bit deceiving. Then there was more bug fixes with Marksmanship and Volley interaction with Aim Shot. Survival can no longer use Steel Trap while Aspect of the Turtle is active. Fixed the bug for the Kyrian ability of Resonant Arrow. Death Trachom now does a lot more damage. Blade Shot has a longer duration, no focus cost, and with that longer duration means more chance for you to get Kill Shot, which now will do 25% more damage when it procs. And there were some minor Conduit fixes for bugs. For mages, we got it pretty easy. Radiant Spark will just do more damage as an ability. Deathborn now has a longer duration and slightly more damage amp to it, and Mirrors of Torment for Arcane and Fire Mage has been adjusted slightly to better benefit both of those specs. For Mistweaver Monks, we got Vivify and Renewing Mist mana reduction decreased. And for Windwalker, we got actually a lot of bug fixes, which might result in Windwalker Monks doing less damage. Zoen the White Tiger is now vulnerable to abilities like Hibernate, Polymorph, and Fear, great for PvP. Touch of Death is actually going to benefit with Mastery now for the damage. Fix an issue where Stormwrath and Fire could break nearby enemies out of stealth. Fix an issue where Zoen could break nearby enemies out of stealth. Fix an issue where Tiger Palm would grant additional stacks of Mark of the Crane when Storm, Earth, and Fire is active, so that's a damage reduction on your spin and crane kick. Fix an issue allowing Mark of the Crane to be maintained permanently at maximum stacks while fighting a single target. Fix an issue that will prevent Stormwrath and Fire spirits from using Fist of Fury, Rising Sun Kick, and Whirling Dragon Punch. Fix an issue that allowed Stormwrath and Fire to continue channeling Fist of Fury after Monk's Fist of Fury channel has ended. That's going to be a damage loss. Fix an issue that caused Spin and Crane Kick's damage to not be properly increased by Spirit of the Crane if the targets die. Basically, if the target died, it still maintained the Spirit Crane Kick buff. So you basically would do more damage Spin and Crane Kicks even if you didn't have targets with it on, because even dead targets still had the debuff. Overall, this could result in Monks actually doing slightly less damage. We don't exactly know by how much, but the last number I heard was about 6% nerf. We'll see if it's actually bigger or smaller once this patch is released. Also, they fixed a couple of Covenant abilities with Phalanx Stump and Fallen Order's Venthyr ability. The Tiger and Ox adepts should have slightly more stats, so maybe they'll be a little stronger. For Paladins, you have a mana cost increase on Holy Shock. For Holy, Protection Ardent Defender will now have a different visual effect when the heal is applied. Covenant ability of Vanquish's Hammer will now generate 1 Holy Power, but there's not a lot of Necrolord Paladins to begin with, so I wonder if there will be more builds with it. Conduits, they changed the Ringing Clarity and the ability of Divine Toll for Red Paladin. Basically, those judgments that it procs with Ringing Clarity Conduit, those are going to be decreased on that single target random hammer procs. Those hammers also going to have a bit of more delay to it. However, they're making it so the Divine Toll has more cleave damage. So if you were hoping to one-shot players as a Retribution Paladin, this patch won't be that great for you. But if you're hoping to cleave enemies, that'll be pretty decent there. And a couple more bug fixes here and there with Conduits. Then we have Priest with Spirit Shell. Spirit Shell is now going to absorb 80% of the healing done instead of for 100, and it'll also be a limit of that absorption based on the caster's spell power rather than maximum health. I think in the short term this is a slight nerf for the ability, but in the long term it's an increase as we're going to get more spell power with better gear. So this is a balancing tuning, and I could totally see Spirit Shell getting nerfed in future patches as priests get better gear. Holy Divine Hymn now will have a longer duration, but it will have to stack up so that the Holy Priest can actually benefit from the Divine Hymn buff. Shadow Priest Mastery Shadow Weaving no longer benefits multiple times from damage amplification effects, so you can't double dip, and Shadowy Apparitions will no longer get stealthies out of stealth as easily. You got some updates to the Covenant ability Fey Guardians, where the Guardian Fairy will now grant you 20% damage reduction, which is an increase, and your Wrathful Fairy will be automatically sent to your closest enemy target, so great for bosses. And with Wrathful Fairies, they fixed a couple bugs in terms of granting resources for multiple targets. Mind Games for Venthyr, if reflected back on the Priest, no longer reverses healing or damage when it's reflected. And Conduits, Fey Fermata, the Night Fey Covenant, now leaves an 80% effective copy of a fairy instead of 60%. So Fey Guardians in a sense is seeing more of a defensive healer-oriented buffs, but generally buffs to the Fey ability itself. For Rogues, we got actually a lot of changes. First of all, Assassination, passive cut to the chase's back, making it so that Envenom extends duration of your Slice and Dice by up to 3 seconds per combo point spent. So Assassination Rogues, pressing Envenom extends duration of your Slice and Dice, so essentially in single target, no more Slice and Dice maintenance. Venomous Wounds will now restore 8 energy instead of 7. Slice and Dice rank 2 has been removed, which was an energy regeneration ability for you. Fix an issue prevented Crimson Tempest from triggering Alacrity, and Poison Bomb will actually get enemies out of CC, like your sap. For Subtlety, they fixed Premeditation, the bug with it. Covenant abilities, they actually did fixes and updates. Echo and Reprimand will no longer apply Find Weakness to non-subtlety rogue targets, which actually worked for Assassin and Outlaw, which was just insane. Serrated Bone Spike saw a bit of a buff to it, doing the damage increase by 300% even though we haven't been able to test it out on PTR so far. But they changed it so you no longer get a charge of this ability when the target is healed to full, primarily for PvP purposes, so you can't punish the enemy team for topping themselves off over and over against a rogue. Also, serrated bone spikes now properly work with the mastery of Assassination Rogue, which is bleed increase, so that could be potentially interesting for that spec in general. The Night Fae ability for Outlaw rogues, when you use the buff Broadside, will now correctly allow Sepsis to generate extra combo points. Flagellation has been redesigned, it no longer costs energy, its duration is reduced to 12 seconds instead of 20. Haste now is granted immediately as you spend combo points into finishers while this buff is active, and this ability does a ton more damage. And now it'll just expire by itself without you having to press this ability again, which is a pretty big buff in terms of damage, as well as the haste and the ease of use. The conduit for this ability is now quite a big damage amp and gives you haste very early on. Also, they fixed an issue with Count the Odds where you would get random buffs from Count the Odds. Those will function separately from Roll the Bones buffs. So if let's say you have a buff with Roll the Bones that falls off, but you still have good buffs from Count the Odds, you can continue playing with those buffs and they won't just disappear out of nowhere. For Shamans, we saw a damage increase to Chain Lightning, as well as a big increase of damage to Lightning Shield. I wonder if that one will be used in PvP more often. For Elemental, we saw a damage increase to Earth Shock, Earthquake, as well as Lava Beam, but a damage reduction for Lava Burst, probably for scaling purposes. Not that Blizzard wants to nerf Elemental, but I think they're just expecting pretty big power spikes in future raids and tiers. For enhancement, Lava Lash damage has been increased, which I think is a good thing. The damage for that ability was kind of low in my opinion. Stormkeeper will now work with only Chain Lightning instead of Lightning Bolts, so it's better in a row as an AoE cleave ability, but that Chain Lightning empowered by Stormkeeper still is going to bring quite a bit of damage. Stormbringer can now properly work with Ice Strike and Sundering Talent. And they also fixed an issue between Stormkeeper and Maelstrom Weapon. For Restoration Shaman, Lava Burst damage has also been reduced just like Elemental, and they fixed an issue with Earthen Wall where it could absorb more damage than it should have. They also buffed up some of the Covenant abilities, like Vesper Totem now does 25% more damage and healing. Fate Transfusion has also been increased in a bit of the damage as well as the healing department. Primordial Wave for Enhancement Shaman Lightning Bolt has also been beefed. Fixed an issue where Primordial Bolt was not usable on allies in Mercenary mode. Chain Harvest Vent durability isn't that good for Elemental or Restoration Shaman, so they buffed the damage and the healing of that ability for those two specs. And Chain Harvest will also now have a more of a visual cue for Enhancement Shamans trying to use that ability with your Maelstrom Weapon charges. And then we have Warlocks with Cursed Tongues now lasting a little bit longer against players as well as NPCs, mostly I think for PvE purposes. Fixed a couple weird bugs with Affliction, with Malefic Rupture, as well as Seed of Corruption. All other summons for Demonology Warlock like Dreadstalkers, Tyrant, Vilefiend, and Nether Portal summons as well as Grimoire Felguard will now, just like an Unholy Death Knight, will listen to your primary pet's commands and will adjust, which makes those pets a lot smarter to use for PvE and PvP. Call Dreadstalkers attack power is increased by 10%, Dreadbite and the Talent of Dreadlash damage is increased by 10%, so potentially more dog-based builds for Demonology Warlocks in the future. Destruction with that big mastery of chaotic energies now properly works for Corruption if you ever want to press Corruption. They did some updates, small ones, for Covenant abilities like Scour and Tithe. You actually need to be facing the enemy. Decimated Bolt is now going to have a bigger execute ability part to it, like it's going to do more damage the lower the target's health is. Impending Catastrophe damage has been tuned slightly and it can no longer destroy totems. I don't think that buff to Impending Catastrophe though is going to be all that big, but we'll see if any Warlocks end up playing Impending Catastrophe in the future. When it comes to Warriors, it's mostly bug fixes, but some of the notable stuff is Protection is going to do 10% more damage, and Thunderclap was going to do 10% additional damage. The Warrior Necrolord ability of Conqueror's Banner has been redesigned, so now you brandish the banner on your back, you no longer put it down. So the buff travels with you. While the banner is active, you and two allies grant 400 mastery and 30% movement speed. You and those two allies cannot get slowed below 100% movement speed. The banner is now going to generate your rage every single second that it's on you for 15 seconds, and it's now a 2-minute cooldown instead of a 3-minute cooldown, with Conduit for Veterans Repute granting you extra strength when you use the banner instead of glory. The ability of Fleshcraft for Necrolord Covenant has been changed. They shortened the channel time of this ability from 4 seconds to 3 seconds. While channeling Fleshcraft, you reduce damage you take by 20% for those 3 seconds. After you finish channeling, you'll have a 40% maximum health buff for 2 minutes. and when you walk over nearby corpses, it reduces the cooldown of flesh cap by 1 second. All the other benefits of, let's say, dungeons like Plaguefall, for example, when you need to consume the slimes, that'll happen now passively when you walk over enemy corpses, and any of the other soul binds that work off of cooldown reduction or channeling on enemies will also now happen passively. So all those things have been adjusted and should hopefully make this covenant a lot stronger. Let's take a break from some of the class stuff and talk about some of the other things that have been added to the game, like changes to dungeons and raids. Hall of Atonement Loyal Stormborn, the Deventhyr can mind control, will be a little bit weaker and they won't carry the dungeons nearly as heavily, but for Sanguine Depths, the Anima Cages are going to be a lot more usable and a lot stronger. They made a couple changes to how Mythic dungeons work in terms of what kind of level you end up getting for the end of the week or 2 weeks, and definitely worth read if you're someone who has a lot of alts that tries to get the minimum like 15s done every single week. They also changed Plaguefall and Sanguine Depths in terms of how they work for certain mobs with necrotic affix. They also added Valor points to 905. We talked about them extensively, but basically you'll be able to use Valor points to upgrade dungeon gear, and the higher item level is going to be allowed based on the achievement earned on that character. Now, we don't know if this will be a cross character, like account bound, or if it will be per character. Also, you will not be able to upgrade pre-existing gear from previous dungeons. You'll have to acquire gear inside of 905 dungeons due to technical limitations that Blizzard mentioned. So sorry to tell all of you that we're waiting for a big fatty piece on, let's say, the Tuesday, Wednesday reset. That piece of gear from the weekly vault of that week will not be upgradable by Valor points. However, you'll be able to start Valor points that week at 5,000 cap, increasing by 750 every week after, so you'll at least be able to catch up with Valor points. And the best return at Valor is to do some Mythic Plus dungeons. So doing dungeons, you'll be getting Valor and spending that Valor to upgrade trinkets, items to whatever item level that is available to your character, depending on your progress. They also added Castle Nathria full of potency conduits. So as you do Castle Nathria, you can actually get potency conduits not just from dungeons, but from raid itself. They changed a little bit how Great Vault works when it comes to slaying bosses to a coefficient of 369 bosses instead of 3710. So if you miss out on one boss inside of Castle Nathria, no big worries. There's also other adjustments to items and rewards. You're more than welcome to look at the screen, but for this video we'll move on to legendaries. Hop back on the classes. Blood Death Knights is seeing quite a lot of buffs to a variety of their legendaries, which could actually be really good in the future. With Unholy getting one that wasn't really a meta legendary that's getting a side buff, wonder if it'll get any use. Demon Hunter's got a mixed bag of different legendary buffs. It's really difficult to tell if any of those are going to be meta or even best in slot. We got minor adjustments to feral legendaries with energy regen or cooldown reduction. Beastmaster Hunters are seeing a lot of their legendaries getting buffed, but all those legendaries were heavily behind the one legendary from the Torghast Anima Power, the Soulforge one, that it's hard to tell if any of them are going to be good, but definitely with future scaling in next tiers, it could be really good. Marksmanship saw a couple buffs here and there, but the biggest one that's a nerf is Serpent Stalker's Trickery no longer triggers Wild Spirits twice. So that's going to be actually a pretty big, maybe even massive reduction in their value. Survival saw a small buff to latent poison injectors. We'll see if that'll be any good. Mages saw a lot of their less popular legendaries getting a bit of a tune-up. I wonder if any of them are going to become good or maybe make a viable build out of them in the future. Same thing can be said for the monks. However, Shauhao's Might for Brewmaster could be really good, because that actually could be quite good for Brew in terms of damage increase, as well as getting your defensive resources back pretty quickly. But again, it's really difficult to tell if any monks are going to make swaps to any of those legendaries. Just like monks and mages, Paladins saw some of their lesser used legendaries getting slight buffs here and there. Some of the notable stuff though is cooldown reduction aspects to the Protection Paladin legendary, the Ardent Protector's Sanctum, which should be quite interesting actually, as well as Retribution Paladin, Final Verdict actually being buffed a bit. Quite a few of you guys in duos have been using that one recently, so I wonder how good that will be, and maybe that'll become meta. Maybe it'll be better than the tanking legendary the Retribution Paladins have been using, because a lot of you guys found that one very frustrating to play against. Priests saw a couple interesting changes, nothing amazing for Cauterize and Shadows. For Discipline Priests, they're trying to make Kiss of Death a little bit stronger. I don't know if it'll be that good. For Holy, we actually have Divine Image legendary change, where it'll now use more abilities in your toolkit based on what covenant you are, and it'll try to mirror your abilities a lot better. And if the priest finds themselves crowd controlled, like let's say in PvP, Divine Image will try healing nearby low HP allies if possible. Then of course, also like the other classes, quite a few buffs to legendaries that are not really seeing a lot of play right now. Then we have Rogues. Mark of the Master Assassin will no longer function with anything but Rogue's auto attack and abilities. So Rogues utilizing, let's say, items inside of, I don't know, Necrotic Wake, like spears and hammers, will no longer have the value increase from Mark of the Master Assassin, which is kind of an ouch, but also trinkets will not work with Master Assassin either. Quite a big nerf overall. Titan Taxi Blades is going to do a bit more damage. I don't think that's going to see much play. Essence of Bloodfang didn't really get buffed too much. Doomblade will now do considerable damage, and actually with the changes to Assassination could be quite good. Dustwalker's patch for Assassination cooldown reduction will actually be quite decent. Outlaw saw buffs to legendaries that are not really getting much play, and same thing can be said for Subtlety. However, Deathly Shadows now impact Subtlety a little bit greater than it does for Assassination as well as Outlaw. For Elemental Shamans, Echoes of Great Sundering got a nerf, but you should also be aware that Earthquake baseline has gotten a buff, so I think both of those should level out. Slight buff to Legacy of Frostwitch, and debuff from Doomwinds now persists through death, so I guess a Shaman can just die, get B-res, and use it again if they wanted to. They buffed some of the legendaries for Restoration Shaman as well. The Affliction Warlock legendaries for Malefic Wrath and Wrath of Kasosha got buffed slightly, and Wrath now works with Scouring Tithe. Demonology Implosive Potential Haze buff is now slightly longer duration, and Bale Spider's Burning Core damage has been increased for Demon Bolt, potentially could make it good for the Demonology Warlocks that went Necrolord in particular. Destruction, a couple of the legendaries have also gotten buffed as well. Warriors saw overall buffs to the legendaries with Enduring Blow and Battle Lord, as well as Exploder's Mortal Strike damage has also been increased for arms. Fury saw a couple of the legendaries have the duration for the buffs that they add increased, so you could potentially make those buffs last a bit longer or juggle them a little better. A couple changes also was done for protection with Reprisal redesigned. Charge and Intervene will grant you 4 seconds of shield block, and Revenge and generates Rage, so that could potentially be good in Mythic Pluses. Unbreakable Will now also grants you another charge of Shield Wall, which could be really good. And Seismic Reverberation damage has been increased also slightly for protection. Now onto some PvP changes. The Horde flag size in Warsong Gulch and Twin Peaks have been normalized, so both flags should have the same size. Focused Assault and Brutal Assault debuffs now increase damage taken by 10% per stack and reduces healing received by 5% per stack in battlegrounds like Warsong Gulch, Twin Peaks, and Eye of the Storm, so holding onto the flag will get harder and harder the more of those debuffs are up. And they also made it so you can't Bloodlust, Heroism, Time War, Primal Rage, or Drums of Heroism / Drums of Maelstrom before a battleground prepared. So you can't pre-lust your party, run into a, I don't know, Silver Shard Mines and just blast the enemy team out and then chain a second Bloodlust out of it. So I guess some of the fun has been removed out of the game. We also saw redesigns, or slight alterations rather, to Ashran, Isle of Conquest, and Wintergrasp in order to change the way that those BGs work. Like for example, Wintergrasp was very much favored to the defensive team, so now the offense is going to give a bit few more buffs in order to be more competitive. Isle of Conquest is going to try to reduce the big value of the hangar and give more value to other capture points to collect. Ashran's, the two majors on both Alliance and Horde side, should be a little bit better scaled and will probably be a deadlier, and to summon a big elemental for Kronos or Fangrel on Alliance or Horde, it'll be a little bit cheaper to do so. For class PvP changes, Ashen Hollow, Spear of Bastion, Resonating Arrow, and Wild Spirits, and similar effects will now be easily distinguishable when the enemy team casts those. For Death Knights, your summon Raise Dead Pet for Frost is no longer going to stun the enemy. You'll have Venge Demon Hunter, Illidan Grasp ability should actually be able to be used again. Roar Sacrifice is no longer usable when the hunter's pet is dead or crowd controlled, and they changed the way the Ice Foam works to kind of fit Icy Veins being off the GCD and properly working with conduits. Also fixed Nether Precision and Arcane Prodigy conduits to properly function with Arcane Empowerment. Shadow Resistance aura for Paladins has been removed and now is Divine Vision, which reduces the cooldown of Aura Mastery by 1 minute. Ultimate Sacrifice now lasts only 6 seconds and no longer has any kind of DRs attached to it. And then we also have Steed of Glory ability will only give you immunity to roots and snares, so you can actually crowd control the Paladin rampaging on his horse. They also fixed an issue with Royal Decree Conduit from affecting Guardian of Forgotten Queen PvP talent. Then for Priest, Greater Fate is now cancelled when a player attempts to capture a PvP objective, and you can now cast Mass the spell while Greater Fate is active. When it comes to Rogues, Control as King, PvP talent has been fixed so it's no longer bugged, and Shadowy Duel can no longer be cast on targets that have immunities like Ice Block and Divine Shield. For Shaman, Hex now interrupts players that are channeling to capture PvP objective, so you can no longer capture flags as a frog. Couple changes to Amplify Curse, Circle of Casting, as well as Demonic Armor for Warlocks to beef them up a little bit more, and fixed an issue with Rapid Contagion. For Warrior, Barbarian no longer resists the cooldown of all heroic leap charges when used with a Leaper legendary effect. Arms Warrior now fixed an issue where War Banner would expire earlier when there was multiple of them active, and fixed Overwatch to be consumed by damage procs of area effect spells. We also got a ton of anima updates and Torghast updates, but those I feel like are better to be experienced. There's just a lot of them and there's no way I can cover them in a video, otherwise this thing would be literally an hour long, and by now already this video is way too long, so honestly we're gonna call it here. 905 is going to be happening literally next week, very extremely soon, and all these changes to me look absolutely fantastic. Lots of covenant changes where I can actually go and change a couple of my characters' covenants, and right now would be the perfect time if you wanted to play a certain covenant and you wanted to make that swap. Right now is a good time to do it, start getting that renown, but even if you're not sure if a covenant is going to be good or not, better wait until next week, look at some of the sims, look at some of the information we have afterwards, and then make a decision then. There's no point of rushing and making a wrong decision so early. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about all these changes for 905 so far? And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.